Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to all dignitaries and Professor Kaushik Basu to today's lecture of Professor N.R. KAMATH Distinguished Institute Lecture Series. Professor Kaushik Basu will be the speaker for today's lecture. He is a celebrated professor for economics and Karl Marx professor at Cornell University. I would like to request Professor Ravindra Gudi, the Dean of Academic and Corporate Relations, to please come and say a few words about Professor N.R. KAMATH and the Distinguished Institute Lecture Series.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you to this N.R. KAMATH Distinguished Lecture. I would like to extend a very special welcome to today's speaker, Professor Kaushik Basu, recipient of the Padma Bhushan, Professor of Economics and the Karl Marx Professor at Cornell University, and Professor N.R. KAMATH, Visiting Chair Professor at IIT Bombay. While a detailed introduction to him will be given by Professor K. Narayanan, I must mention that he was formerly the Senior Vice President and Chief Economist of the World Bank, and prior to that, the Chief Economic Advisor to the Indian government. Dr. Basu has published widely in the areas of development economics, industrial organization, game theory, and welfare economics. His books have been translated into several languages, including Chinese, Spanish, Italian, Russian, and French. Professor Basu has held visiting positions at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, London School of Economics, Harvard University, Princeton University, and MIT. During his tenure as the Professor of Economics at the Delhi School of Economics, he founded the Center for Development Economics and was its first executive director. He is also a founding member of the Madras School of Economics. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kaushik Basu. While we are here, I would also like to mention a few special words about our very distinguished Professor N.R. KAMATH. We have gathered here in memory of Professor N.R. KAMATH, and I would like to take this platform to talk a little bit about his work, his leadership, and his tremendous contributions to the growth of IIT Bombay. Professor KAMATH was instrumental in shaping the destiny of IIT Bombay. He was the founding head of the Department of Chemical Engineering and the deputy director of the institute in 1960. As a respected teacher, as a highly respected teacher and educator, Professor KAMATH had a very profound impact on the formative years of IIT Bombay, as well as the chemical engineering profession at large. He inspired everyone around him to achieve excellence at every step of the way. He was especially popular for his insightful lectures on the history of technology and was widely respected for not just the brilliant educator that he was, but also being the human being that he touched many lives with. Professor KAMATH was a very trustworthy and dependable friend to his colleagues, a father figure to his students, and he truly was an institution in his right and has left behind a very rich legacy that will be cherished forever. I must say that in 2014, which was the birth centenary year of Professor N.R. KAMATH, a lot of his students whom he touched both as students here and further in their profession, they came together to reminisce him, to pay a very, very rich tribute to him. We have one of them here, Mr. Deepak Himat-Sinka, but there are several others out in globally who reminisced about him a lot and who have helped establish this distinguished chair professorship, which we call as the N.R. KAMATH Institute Distinguished Chair Professorship at IIT Bombay. And Professor Kaushik Basu, we are really fortunate to have him here as one of the Institute Distinguished Professors on this chair position. It's really humbling, therefore, to witness the ways in which we continue honoring Professor KAMATH's work, and today's lecture is a case in point. I would again like to express on behalf of the Institute our sincere thanks to Professor Basu for gracing us with his presence. and for agreeing to speak on such an important and critical topic. Please join me again in welcoming Dr. Kaushik Basu to this.
Thank you so much, Professor Goody. Now, I may please request Professor K. Narayanan, Head of Department for Economics Department, to please come on the stage and welcome and introduce the speaker.
Very good afternoon to all of you, Professor Chaudhary, Professor Basu, Professor Goody, and other distinguished colleagues, invitees, and students. Gives me immense pleasure to sort of briefly be briefly biographical about Professor Basu. Born in Calcutta, schooled in St. Xavier's Collegiate School in Calcutta. In an autobiographical essay, he noted that finishing school in 1969, he was caught in a dilemma. The choice, his father wanted him to study physics, and he didn't want to study. And then, because those were revolutionary times, and then between nothing and physics, the compromise was made to study economics at St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. And then he did economics with mathematics, a subsidiary, and went to London School of Economics after that to do his MSc in economics. And after earning his master's, again there was a choice. Perhaps his father wanted him to become a lawyer, and then he decided to, being inspired by the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, he decided to pursue education in economics and did his PhD with Professor Sen on social choice theory. On completing his PhD, Professor Basu was at the Reading University and then returned to India in 1977 to be a reader in economics, later professor of economics at the Department of Economics, Delhi School of Economics, where he has taught several generations of students. You can imagine how many years he would have taught several of us over the years. Professor Basu has held visiting professorship at MIT, Harvard, Institute of Advanced Studies, Princeton, Center for Operational Research and Econometrics in Belgium, and London School of Economics. And additionally, he was also visiting scientist at the Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta. He is published, as Professor Goody mentioned, in several areas, especially in development economics, game theory, industrial organization, political economy, and the economics of child labor. Now, he has published numerous research papers in internationally peer-reviewed journals. And most of the top journals in the field of industrial economics and development economics have published papers written by him. And his writing in these forums have advanced theoretical underpinnings in economics, as well as influenced policy making over the last 4 decades, which made the Government of India invite him to be Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India between 2012, till about 2012. Then he went on to join the World Bank as the Chief Economist. Well, I must say that second Asian and first Indian to be appointed Chief Economist of the World Bank. Now, he has authored several books in economics and also a play, Crossings at Benares Junction, which was published by the Little magazine. And he's editor of the Oxford Companion of Economics in India, published by Oxford University Press, and which is a compendium on Indian economy. And one of his books, Beyond the Invisible Hand, that's what Professor Goody mentioned, has also been translated to other languages in Europe, most recently in French in 2017. And his other books, which many of us are very, very familiar with, includes The Real Preference of Government, The Less Developed Economy, A Critique of Contemporary Theory, Economic Graffiti, which many of us read with a lot of interest, even we go back to it again and again, which is Essays for Everyone, and Lectures in Industrial Organization Theory, which is taught in all the IO courses in many institutions in India, apart from around the world. Agrarian Question, Of People, of Places, Sketches from an Economist's Notebook, which we read with vivid interest, and Analytical Development Economics, Prelude to Political Economy, Readings in Political Economy, Collected Papers in Theoretical Economics, and the most recent, which we're talking about over lunch also today, Policymakers Journal, From New Delhi to Washington, which I would recommend all of you to read. We are at the crossroad where we should read his insights. What are the challenges one faces while suggesting policies to the Government of India? Several awards and recognition, the list is too long, my time is very limited, but I must say, among other institutions which has given him the honoris causa includes Lucknow University, Assam University in Silchar, Fordham University in New York, and IIT Bombay in 2013, and Jadavpur University. And during his, his childhood interest in, Euclidean geometry found expression and drew attention when he was chief economist of the World Bank. And he published a paper giving a new proof of the Pythagoras theorem via a property of isosceles triangles. That also made us wonder that when did he get time to do that? And of course, he's also a recipient of the National Mahalanobis Memorial Medal, Fellow of the Econometric Society, and Padma Bhushan by Government of India in 2008, and Alexander Van Humboldt Foundation Research Award in 2021, more recently. So Professor Basu, what we all look forward to him for, is believes strongly that good moral qualities are essential for growth and development within the economy. Honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity are important qualities that need to be inculcated in an individual for personal development as well as within the society for development. That's something that he has spoken about it in IIT Bombay earlier, and Professor Basu also feels the need to promote quality thinking in government and public debate. And with such illustrious accomplishments, we stand here to invite one of our youngest alumni, got the degree only in 10 years ago, a distinguished Doctor of Literature Honoris Causa for his contribution to the field of economics, both as a teacher as well as a researcher. And we are honored to invite Professor Basu to deliver the coveted Professor N.R. Kamath Distinguished Institute Lecture. Thank you so much, Professor Basu, for coming.
Thank you, Professor Narayanan, for the introduction of guest. I may now request Director Professor Subhashish Chaudhary, Dean Professor Ravindra Gudi, and Professor Kaushik Basu on the dais. I would request Director Sir to please felicitate Professor Basu. Thank you so much, sir. I would request Professor Basu to take the stage and deliver the lecture. Okay, thank you so much.
That's a good idea. Okay, and you'll give. I've got one already, so and then I will need something to. If I can't, I will tell them. If I no, yes, it's okay now. When I get that concept, I will stop. Yeah, I should be able to let me. Yeah, even if I can do, my skill may not be up to it. Yeah, no, it's working. Yeah, yeah. And is there a cursor to point? Will I be able to point to it? I'm just checking. Doesn't matter. It's near enough that I can do it physically. Thank you very much. Well, Professor Chaudhary, Professor Gudi, Professor Narayanan, he was my student. It feels odd to say Professor Narayanan. It's so good to see Mr. Himatsinka, all of you. There are lots of friends. I've already met several of you. Just thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here. I have to say that my association with IIT has grown over the years. It's been a wonderful association for me. There was a big interruption, not surprisingly, during the COVID period that I did not come. But coming back here, and that guest house, I have to say, it does something to the soul as you look out
onto the lake. And lots of friends that I have here. I used to earlier be in the management science school, so the NR KAMATH chair has given me an insight and interaction with IIT, which is very, very special to me. Thank you very much for the invitation this time to give this lecture. Choosing a topic for an IIT audience is never easy. And I'll tell you what, I was going back and forth with Narayanan for the choice. I mean, I do give lots of very broad popular talks, which are basically 10 or 20 op-eds, newspaper op-eds put together on where is the world economy going, which is, yes, there are lots of things to speculate over there. But I did want to inflict a little bit more concrete stuff here. Problems to be solved, open-ended problems. This is, after all, IIT. You should not feel proud about it, but you should feel good about it, that you are in the frontiers of education and research. And this I say again because of my personal belief that in the end, you can see the immediate impact of policy from one week to the next. But in the long run, nothing is more important in a country than the space for inquiry, research, and the advance of knowledge. And if that was the topic, I could give you examples from history where countries seem to be neck to neck. Then one country over the next 10, 20 years surges and moves ahead. And if you track down, it is this sector which will not give you an impact in the next year or the year after, so it gets ignored. But that is what makes the big difference, and IIT is really a symbol of that. Choosing a topic was difficult. What I've chosen is something that I've been working on. There's a bunch of things I'm working on. I've been working on over the last 3 years. It's an interface between something very practical on group moral responsibility. And group moral responsibility is an important responsibility because there are lots of things where, as a single individual, I can do very little. But as a collectivity, we do have a responsibility. Climate change. I can play my tiny part, but that in itself will do nothing. It is the collective action which is crucial. Democracy, the sustenance of democracy. I can play a minor role, but it's something together that needs to be done. Even in terms of economics, concrete economic matters, with globalization, the world is so linked up that you need collective action. So it is group morality, and morality, I'll come to that. I do believe that in economics, we don't write down the moral axioms as axioms, but I feel they play a role, and I will come to that in a moment. So I thought that I'm working on. I can give a very general talk. There'll be about 5 minutes of a slightly technical bit towards the end, even less than 5 minutes. For those who have a bit of a background in game theory, this will raise a few open questions I wanted people to provoke. If you don't have an interest in that, 5 minutes, switch off and think of something else. And again, I'll come back to practical stuff where you have to think, but you don't need any background. The game theory that I will use will be very light game theory. You don't need to know any game theory. I will explain the bit that I will use for this. But I wanted to start with something a bit broader and then get into this group moral responsibility and the role of the leader, etc. After that. The broader thing is generally about the status of economics today, the challenge of economics today, and here are the topics so you will get to see. What is it that we need to do in economics? And it's really a challenging time. And I do feel that for all the wrong reasons, the world is a very troubled place. It is a very special moment for economics. You know, people have written about what is it that economics tries to do. Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, they wrote beautifully that a lot of the problem of challenge of economics is the work of plumbing, basically. You just need to do experiments, get to understand, and then put in the right policies in place. Extremely important. Collecting the data, doing that kind of analysis, and then putting in policies one after another makes a huge difference. But there is a fundamental part of the discipline, which, like in today's world, which is a bit of a turning point for the world, you do need to also pay attention to some of the deeper challenges, and I will give you one or two examples of what I mean by deeper challenges before I get into the past, into the specific topic that I will look into here. By deeper challenges, I mean the following. You know, in any discipline, when you write it up formally, you will have some explicit assumptions. To understand the world, whether it's physical sciences you're talking about or economics, social sciences, we make assumptions. The full world can't be described, so you make some assumptions and then you move on. Those assumptions we write down explicitly. Very often, in some disciplines, you'll write them as axioms. In fact, since Euclid was mentioned, Euclid developed a geometry which is axiomatic geometry, wrote down the axioms. When you write down the axioms, a large part of the research becomes checking, are those axioms correct? So you collect empirical data and see. I worked on child labor earlier, and my work on child labor is based on two important axioms. And there are lots of empirical studies trying to see if those axioms, which I assumed, are empirically true or not. But in any discipline, this is my belief, there are also assumptions, deeper assumptions, which are assumptions in the woodwork of the discipline. They are so built into the discipline that we are not even aware of them, even people who practice. It's only during a crisis in the world or crisis of the discipline that you discover the hidden assumption that was there but never written down as an axiom. The best example of that, and I'm glad Euclid was mentioned, because the best example of that is Euclidean geometry. Euclid decided that he wanted to write down geometry in complete axiomatic structure. These are my assumptions, all written down as axioms, and these are the theorems and lemmas I'm proving out of those axioms. We know in retrospect that there was at least one axiom that Euclid was using that Euclid was not even aware that Euclid was using. That is the axiom that the entire geometry is being done on a flat surface, not for the world which is spherical. So the laws of Euclidean geometry may apply but may not apply to the spherical world. As long as we lived in close distance, traveling short distances, that error that was coming from that implicit assumption that Euclid was aware of he was making did not make much of a difference. But can you imagine in today's age with planes flying across, if you are using the algebra stemming from Euclidean geometry with one assumption which is wrong for this surface, you would be making disastrous mistakes. Fortunately, it got discovered, the Euclid's implicit assumption. And here, for people who are not economists and people who are not in any particular discipline, it's worthwhile. Some of the biggest discoveries come from people outside, because they are not brainwashed in the way we are, because we use these axioms built into our head. In the case of Euclidean geometry, we know that the first awareness came from people outside the discipline. One of the most important is Schweikart. Ferdinand Karl Schweikart, a lawyer, intellectual lawyer in Germany, felt that Euclid was using an axiom that Euclid was unaware of. He tried to redo it. Then he reached out to a mathematician, Gauss, and discussed with Gauss that there is probably this, and non-Euclidean geometry, after that Riemann geometry, whole lot, it develops into a major discipline. In economics, there are examples. I'll give you just one, which in today's world, it is something that we never write down as an axiom, but which we probably need to talk about, and there are other axioms, which is the following. The world of trade and business that takes place, and in deeper research, that is fascinating, that if you first think about looking at the world, people making huge amounts of clothes, saris, trousers, shirts, someone stitching who will not use is making it. Why is this person doing it? For someone else to wear. Why? And someone else is growing food for someone else to eat. It's no surprise that Adam Smith was puzzled by this. And then Adam Smith came out with 1776, his famous book. He comes out with an explanation of what might be going on in this case, which is the invisible hand of the market that makes it come together. Adam Smith's was a verbal description in 1776. It took at least 100 years for that to be given mathematical structure. It was Leon Walras, 2 years short of 100 years, 1774, comes out with the mathematical structure that can explain the Adam Smith's world where people can be completely selfish, but the market will function. But there were assumptions beneath that which were becoming clear, and there was one problem. The existence of this equilibrium, that such an equilibrium exists, was very difficult to prove. Walras did not manage to prove. That happened after about 80 years, 1950s. And that is Kenneth Arrow. And it's a very interesting history. John Nash, the mathematician, game theorist, cracked a theorem in game theory using a mathematics theorem which was still quite new at that time, Kakutani's fixed point theorem. He proved something in game theory, and then Kenneth Arrow suddenly realized Kakutani is the clue to understanding the way the equilibrium functions, and Arrow and Gerard Debreu together took the idea from Nash, took Kakutani's theorem, and then the agenda for Adam Smith is complete. With the axiomatic agenda complete, Gerard Debreu has a book where you can write down all the axioms just like Euclid, where the economy functions. And I'll give you one example, which I've written about and spent time on. We know that for trade and exchange to occur, you need a couple of axioms. And those axioms are now in economics books written very carefully. You need people to be greedy. You want more rather than less. People are working hard to get more. You need the law of diminishing marginal utility. As you have more and more of one commodity, the marginal satisfaction you're getting from that begins to go down, which creates the need for diversity. If you have a lot of rice, you'll say, now I want to give up some of this and buy dal or buy something else. The law of diminishing marginal utility. There are a few other axioms about production, concave production function, etc. Those axioms are written down. One axiom, but with all those axioms valid, trade and exchange will take place. The interesting thing is, rats, mice and rats. Rats satisfy, it has been now seen, all those explicit axioms are satisfied by rats, but rats don't perform trade and exchange. What is it? There are implicit assumptions there. One of them, for instance, for two people to trade, even if all these mechanical axioms are true, you need the ability to talk. That, look, I will give you this much, how much will you give? No economics books writes down as an axiom, can talk. You don't write it down, it's taken for granted. But when our mode of communication is beginning to change, that axiom may need to be an axiom at a turning point. You need to recognize that. I also personally believe that minimal moral codes of behavior are crucial for a society to do well. And on this, there are experimental studies also that people who are trustworthy, they trust one another. There are laboratory tests done in Israel. Groups that trust one another, when they begin to do trade in labs, they enrich themselves quicker. The trust plays a role. Whereas in economics models, we don't write down an axiom that there is trust among people. Those are the kinds of axioms which play a role, and I feel at a turning point of the discipline when the world is going through a change, you need to explore, scrape and explore that do we need to recognize explicitly something as an assumption, which is today probably going wrong and needs investigation once again. And one more word on this general thing, and I will turn to my topic over here, is one similar turning point. The global economy now is in a very difficult stage for a variety of reasons. Let me give you one concrete example, which is being written about in the popular literature a lot, but here is a concrete example. Supply chains. Everyone is talking about it. In the United States, there is paranoia that if the supply chain is passing through China, China can suddenly cut it off, and then your entire economy will be in a disastrous state. What is it? And it's a very different kind of modeling that is needed. This I can explain to you in words. Take the automobile industry. In the olden days, when you said that there are 100 firms producing cars, there are 100 firms each producing a full car. If one of those firms closes down, 1/100th of the production will close down. Prices will rise, etc. The modern industry is increasingly, let's take an extreme case, is becoming where there are 100 firms producing cars, but one of them is actually producing just the wheels. One of them is producing just the engines. One of them is just producing the chassis, whatever be the part. So 100 firms are producing cars still, but it is a vertical structure. Here, if one firm stops production, it's not 1/100th of the production that will stop. The industry will come to a grinding halt. With supply chains, that is the fear, that someone somewhere can cut off the supply chain and the whole global economy comes to a grinding halt. You need new regulations to step in place of this, and this is indeed a very big challenge. A similar time for economics was the Industrial Revolution, when the technology changed dramatically and we faced lots of challenges. And if you look at the early periods of the Industrial Revolution, thanks to the changes in technology, the global economy was in a very, very bad shape. People just didn't know because the markets were behaving differently and they didn't know how to handle. Some of the deepest economic analysis overlaps with the Industrial Revolution. From Adam Smith's classic work, 1776, to John Stuart Mill, 1776, John Stuart Mill, 1848, is 100 years. Walras a little later, Curno, the deepest thought comes in over there. And I do believe it's a time like that. So for people of economics and people outside the discipline also, who have the training and are not trained, do not have the trained in capacity that we very often develop within our own discipline, there is a big challenge here. Let me enter into what I want to talk about today. I'm going to base it on two of my recent papers and a rather open-ended one which is not finished, which I will give you a glimpse with that slightly technical part. The problem that I'm going to get into, and I've been drawn into this, is the fact that groups very often behave badly, and the question then arises, who is responsible? How do you make the group behave better? One of the things that we all tend to do, when we don't like the behavior of a group, we say this person is causing it. You can say that, and at times there may be one person causing it, but most of the time it is an enmeshed system where everyone is playing a bit role. As David Hume pointed out, that David Hume was probably reacting to Hobbes, talking about the power of the leader. Hume reminds you that in the end, the power of the leader does not come from muscles and strength. Beyond the point, what can the leader do? It is the beliefs of the masses, individuals thinking about others and others thinking about others. It is this enmeshed belief that results in the power of the leader. And that is what makes groups behave well or groups behave badly. But once you become sensitive to this, if you read newspapers, and I'm sitting in America, I'll see a comment being made about this Democratic Party, Republican Party. You'll see the same thing over here, BJP, Congress. We lump the whole thing together and say that, look, they are causing it. But it's much more complex. It's an enmeshing within that, an individual interest enmeshing, which is resulting in the behavior of the group. How do you hold people morally responsible and try to change this? This is a topic I actually stumbled into this from my policy days. When I came back into research, I started reading. I would read newspapers and say, it's too broad a category. We very often use whole countries. China causes this problem. India causes this problem. Yes, some people in China in some way causes this problem, but China is a complex society, and it's something to do with the interaction to understand that. Philosophers have worked on that. I'll begin with an example of a philosopher's work. But I do believe that to get these into concrete shape, you need a bit of formalism. By formalism, I don't mean mathematics. You can, with mathematics, game theory can be taken very far forward. But plain, simple logic, careful reasoning can give you certain deep insights and can enrich this literature, which is important in practice, and philosophers have worked on this. Let me start with just one example. Joel Feinberg, the paper in Journal of Philosophy, 1968, he's writing about group responsibility. And he's giving one example just to discuss responsibility, tort, law, etc. And I'll create variants of that in a moment. So here is what Feinberg's problem is. group of people, in this case 1,000 people I think in Feinberg. If I get the details wrong, don't worry, the gist of the story I'll give you is correct. I think there were 1,000 people on a beach, sunbathing, when someone begins to drown. And that person drowns and dies, no one gets up. There were 1,000 people. Everyone may be thinking someone else will get up, no one gets up. Who is responsible is the question that Feinberg is raising. And Feinberg says that it seems under the common law, you do not punish anyone. Because if you punish anyone, you have to punish all 1,000 people. That why did you not get up and do this? So apparently under the common law, you do not. But Joel Feinberg goes on to discuss, and here I would think that at one level, each and every person here has the responsibility to have saved, they could have saved. And others did not go, but that was no reason for you not to go. But I'll complicate this by a little bit, and then I will need a tiny bit of formalism, meaning just a few numbers, literally numbers to illustrate what I'm saying. The problem gets more complicated if it's slightly different. Suppose that there are 1,000 people lying on the beach, one person is drowning, but the technology of saving this person is such that if all 1,000 people get up and work together, they will save this kid, this person. Otherwise, they won't succeed. 99 people do, 999 won't do. All 1,000 will have to do it. So it's possible for them to save this child, but no individual can do, no group within this can do. This group, let us say collectively, does nothing. What do I do? I mean, all 1,000 will have to get up, and I say, no point my getting up and doing this. Everyone thinks this way, and the child dies. There, the responsibility becomes more problematic. Should you hold individuals responsible or not? Given that no one on his or her own could have done anything. No 10 people, no 100 people could have done. Everybody, if they worked together, could have done, but no one did. Here comes the question of tort law and whether you should use tort law to impose responsibility even if there is no responsibility, because that could change behavior. I will come back to that later. I'm actually seeing Malik here. Some of these ideas early in an IIT game theory conference, I had developed tiny bits over here, so good I got this topic. After that, I've worked quite a bit on this and developed it much further out of that conference. Okay, what I went on to do, and this has got some attention because there's a biggish literature in the journal Mind, philosophy literature, some early economists talking about group responsibility. I wanted to show that this is indeed problematic, and you can't jump from the bad behavior of the group to holding everyone responsible and pointing fingers and saying all these people are evil and awful. May not be. This is a puzzle, and we should recognize this puzzle because we do need to correct it. Fact that you can't hold people responsible doesn't mean you allow the situation to continue. No one is evil, but the outcome is evil. At times that is the situation. You should recognize that and then think of mechanisms to correct this. Unfortunately, in case you get any big hope, I don't know what the mechanisms are for correcting this. But I feel to see the problem in their eye and begin to think about it is important, and that's what I mean by the open questions. One game that I constructed two games. I will show you one of them. Is a game where this somewhat puzzling thing happens. The people behave in a way, usually the way they behave in games, and often in life, people are acting selfishly, and it has a bad effect on others. The game that I constructed, now it looks very easy, but I feel good about it because I played around with it the first time when I had presented it at an IIT small group. It was very sketchy, and I'm still not getting it right, but now there's a very easy illustration. After people become moral, their collective behavior becomes even more obnoxious. And that is the paradoxical result I want to highlight, and then one begins to think about how to solve this. I've got another version of this game. I won't have the time today to show that, which is called Greta's Dilemma. Greta being Greta Thunberg. You know, Greta Thunberg, very important activist. She will very often say that these leaders are talking all the time, but nothing is happening. I'm glad she says that, but there is something you also have to think about. There are activists like Greta who are also talking all the time and nothing is happening. Does that mean that they are hypocrites like the leaders? The answer is not. And the leaders also may not be hypocrites. It's group action has this problem that each individual is trying, but nothing happening. We have to be aware of that and then think of the mechanism. So I think Greta's concerns are right concerns, but there is also an intellectual side to the agenda that you have to then devise mechanisms to deliver. Okay, the game here is many other digressive thoughts are coming, but I'm holding myself back. Let me get through this, and depending on time, I will do that. This is the problem that I'll show you, and if you are not into game theory at all, you don't worry, but still listen to me. It'll be very clear what I'm doing over here. This is a two-player game. There is one player who has to choose between A, B, and C, the rows. One player is choosing one of the rows. The other player, player 2, is choosing between A, B, and C, the columns. After both make a choice, they'll get payoffs, which are written as follows. This is called a payoff matrix. For economists, this will be repetition, my explaining the language, but still, I will do that. If player 1 chooses C, and player 2 chooses C, the outcome is this. And the payoff they get is the left-hand figure is what goes to player 1, and the right-hand figure goes to player 2. In my paper, these are called dollars. Think of them as dollars, pounds, anything. It's payoff that they are getting. If player 1 chooses C, 2 chooses B, player 1 gets $102, player B gets $80. That's the payoff matrix. A game, and this little bit of formalization I'll do in the end, I will bring this in. A game, from simple games like the Prisoner's Dilemma, Traveler's Dilemma, to complicated games, the Centipede game, etc., a game always has 3 components. First is a set of players. In this case, there are 2 players, 2 individuals, that's all. The players have a set of strategies open to them. In this case, player 1's strategy is open to player 1. Is the volume sinking when I'm moving away? Okay, let me also try to stay here till the need arises. Okay, so player 1 has 3 strategies, player 2 has 3 strategies, and you need payoff functions. Payoff functions are the payoffs that players get after they have chosen their strategies. The payoff function is written down as the final payoffs that they get. This is the full game. Where will this game settle? How will players play? And I've cooked up a game, this is cooked up by me, where there can be very little disagreement about where the game will settle. It's a Nash equilibrium, is an equilibrium of a game. There are some games in which the Nash equilibrium will hit your intuition. Yes, Nash calls it an equilibrium, but is it really an equilibrium? Over here, I've chosen a game where there's only one Nash equilibrium. It has a few other properties, so it's the most natural equilibrium. Let me give you the definition of a Nash equilibrium or equilibrium here. An equilibrium is a choice of strategy on the part of the 2 players, such that given the other player's strategy, I have no reason to change mine. Given my strategy, the other player has no reason to change hers. If we can find a strategy pair like that, then no one will change from there. That's an equilibrium. If, however, you have a strategy pair where one of them can deviate and do better, then that's not an equilibrium. Let's take an example. If both of them choose, sorry, I have been given something to. If both of them choose, let us say, a player 1 chooses C, player 2 chooses B. They get 102 and 80. Is this an equilibrium? The answer is no. If player 2 is choosing B, player 1 instead of C can jump to B and pick up $104 instead of $102. And in fact, the other player can switch instead of 80 and get 106. So 102.80 or CB is not an equilibrium. It won't sustain over there. One of them will move away. This game has exactly one equilibrium. There's only one place in which the players can settle down. I don't know if you can see that. It's on the diagonal, so both choosing the same. This one, CC, is not an equilibrium. Because if both are choosing C, you can jump alone to A and pick up $108. It won't do. AA is not an equilibrium. 102, you'll jump alone to B and pick up 120. BB, can you see, is an equilibrium. If both of you are choosing B, no one has an interest in moving from B. That is a Nash equilibrium as it happens. And in this game, there's no other contender. So if this game were to be played, repeatedly played, they would settle down on BB. And let's say that that's what's happened. They are being rational, individually rational, they've settled down over here. Now, the bystander. Now, as we have in today's world become very, very aware that, it's not just your own welfare you should be concerned about. Okay, you can say the other player is also a rich person, close to 100. 100 is a big figure, let's assume. Add zeros if you want to make it look that way. You don't have to worry about that. But there may be bystanders who are getting hurt by your behavior. For instance, Greta Thunberg would tell you that there are future generations that we have to be concerned about who will inhabit this earth. And if we destroy the earth, then they are going to be miserable. There may be poor people who live in the margins of society. Their actions have very little effect on these people, but what these people do, the kind of cars they drive, kind of behavior they indulge in, has a lot of effect on the bystanders. To take account of this, what I am introducing in the story is, by the way, this is just the Nash equilibrium is with a smudge of yellow. That's the equilibrium. Now, there's a Samaritan comes along, or let us say Greta Thunberg comes along, and let me put the both together. This is the game that you were seeing just now, that I was talking about. But someone comes and draws your attention to the fact that, look, there are poor people outside who are being affected by your behavior, and what they are getting by your behavior is captured in this matrix called the bystander's payoff. I call this pair a society. A society consists of players who are playing a game and the bystanders who get affected by what these players are doing, but they can't do anything back to these people. They are just dormant players. It could be the future generation. They can't hit back. They just get the effect. So if player 1 chooses A and player 2 chooses A, if they both choose A, the bystander gets 20. These are all the payoffs that the bystander gets in terms of the actions chosen by the players. Is the meaning clear? If not, you can stop and ask me. So currently, when these people play the game and reach an equilibrium, the bystander is very poor. Let's say that if you are really below 20, you're shockingly poor. The bystander is getting only 6, is miserably poor. Now this good Samaritan, hence the game is called the Samaritan's Curse, the Samaritan comes and talks to the players, saying, okay, don't think about the other rich person, be selfish over there, but think of the poor, think of the future generation and their payoff. If the Samaritan is successful in the lecture, then these players will now say, yes, I have to pay attention to what the Samaritan gets. Let me make an assumption, this can be changed, you can create paradoxes despite the change, that the players now become conscious of the effect that their action has on the bystanders. So the new game that they are beginning to play after they become moral creatures. Moral creature means I'm interested in my own dollars, but I'm also interested in what my action is doing to these bystanders. So the new game is now my payoff plus the payoff of these poor bystanders I want to maximize. So the Samaritan has pointed out, look, this bystander is getting 6. Whereas if both of you had chosen A, you would lose $2 each from being super rich. 104, you will come down to 102. These people will reach 20, a bare minimum. So please take into account this. So both these players become good, and they begin to take account of the bystander's payoff. The game that you get after they become good moral creatures is the following game. This game is created by taking the original payoffs, which I had, and adding the bystander's payoff to the individual's payoff. Both of them are concerned about the bystander. So is that clear how this is being constructed? Let me actually bring up the bystander's payoff on the right. I'll do that in a moment. Okay. So this is the game. Simply, if you take those two matrices and keep adding the bystander's payoff, you will get this. After this new game has been created where both of them have become moral creatures, what will be the equilibrium is the question. And the equilibrium notion is the same, and it should be very clear. BB now ceases to be an equilibrium. It's true that by going to C, I do worse, but the bystander does so well that If we are at BB, I'm going to switch to C for the sake of the bystander. Once the game changes like this manner, there's only one new equilibrium that gets created over here. I don't know if you can see that. The only new equilibrium is CC. No one will want to move from CC when they are moral creatures. What does it mean for the bystander? Sorry, I've done something wrong. Yeah. I've brought back the bystander's payoff. Earlier, the bystander was getting 6. When these people become moral creatures, the bystander is now getting 4. The fallout on the bystander is exactly what you don't want. And this is meant to highlight a problem on which there is, from Feinberg to there's a literature in Mind and other journals people are talking about. I wanted to give a concrete example. This immediately compels you to think that maybe you have to step outside of the box and think of new ways to take on this problem. Here, I'll mention one slightly philosophical problem and leave it with you. This was actually something highlighted by a mathematician turned game theorist and now increasingly writing modern philosophy, who was my teacher. This is Ken Binmore has written about the game of life. That the game of life is basically a full game where you've written down everything that players can do. And if you think of the Samaritan's Curse as the game of life, then it's pretty inevitable what will happen. The question then arises, can we create rules, step out of the game of life, and create some rules and constitutions that, look, this kind of a behavior is wrong. You must not do that to prevent this. So what you do need, and this is the open agenda, and I will do a little bit of formalization to give you a glimpse into that, is for problems of this kind, you need to sort of write down the problem very, very clearly, and then you're raising the question about how to change people's behavior and incentives so that the effect on the others is a good effect, which means you have the need for the commitment that comes from activists like Greta, but there is an intellectual part to the problem which you cannot ignore. Just to say that we will be good is not good enough. It can in fact backfire. You need the design, and I'll give you one example of, I'll give you a malevolent example of what design can do later on, but you need design to improve it. And I feel a lot of the need in today's world is increasingly we are becoming a globalized world. You need constitutions and prior agreements about certain codes of behavior that you will follow into the future. And nations have survived, I think, because they've managed to build minimum constitutions, that there are certain rules of behavior, certain institutions that we abide by. And there is a need increasingly to look at the world and think in terms of more and more global rules and regulations. You don't want them to encroach heavily on individuals, but you can't ignore them. It's things like the UN Charter needs to be modernized. Just a footnote over here that it may at first sight look like impossibly idealistic that such a thing can happen, but we have ultimately done constitutions for huge diverse countries. When you first talked about a constitution, you'd say impossible. A country like India can't agree on a constitution, it's too big. But India did it. United States, 1787, you'd say that it's impossible. It's a diverse land with people of different cultures, the natives and others. You can't have a constitution, but you did it. So we have to get into some of these big topics. Now, I want to give one example from, I'm wondering whether I'll use a PowerPoint and do it or jump over and do it. I'm skipping over Greta's dilemma. Yeah. Okay. Let me. Leadership plays a very important role in this, but here again, there's something to understand. We very often think of the leader as all-powerful, which is what Hobbes was doing in his philosophical writings. It was David Hume who pointed out that in the end, the power of the leader is little to do with the leader, but ordinary people's beliefs about one another, and that empowers the leader, but it is the beliefs of ordinary people doing that. And one of the most beautiful examples is the document that Václav Havel, who would later become the president of Czechoslovakia, When he was in prison, he started writing this paper called The Power of the Powerless. And Havel is pointing out something which is remarkable, that it is game theory being done by a practical person. Havel is looking at this behavior of ordinary people who are just propping up the ideas that ought not to be propped up, and Havel is asking who is doing this. And Havel reaches the conclusion that it is just one another. It's pressurizing one another that's doing it. And there's one beautiful example of a similar thing by George Akerlof, very early paper on caste in India. Is it politically contentious, because Akerlof's explanation is actually a very generous explanation of the worst forms of caste practices. But don't switch off just because it sounds politically incorrect. There are politically incorrect things that you need to look up. Akerlof, having been an outsider, having spent 6 months at the Indian Statistical Institute, went back and wrote about some caste practices in a very interesting way in a paper in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. Why do some people practice these dreadful caste practices? Akerlof gives a rather generous explanation. Says that a lot of this is not that that person wants to be a casteist, but if that person does not follow the rules of caste, others will outcast that person. And this creates an equilibrium where everyone is mimicking dreadful caste practices, but the cause is not that the individuals are wicked and doing that. It is that you've fallen into a trap. It may not be fully that, it may be partly that, partly something else, but these are mechanisms that we need to understand so that we try to improve things. One of the things that I had earlier thought about talking, but that's a much more technical paper, is where does the power of the leader comes from? I do believe it comes from the creation of focal points. A focal point, I'll give you a little bit of a 5-minute introduction to focal point, because my full book, The Republic of Beliefs, is about the focal point. The focal point, and it shows another side of game theory. You know, game theory to me is the span of methodologies that can be used. On the one hand, there is someone like John Nash, 2-page paper, 3-page paper. In fact, one of the papers, his most important paper, is 1 page, 1.5 pages. Which we have some T-shirts in Cornell made with the full paper. That's the only time I read that paper, is on the T-shirt I had read it, full paper printed out, where he uses Kakutani's fixed point theorem for the first time. Very technical work. On the other hand, there's someone like Thomas Schelling. Very deep work, without a shred of mathematics, but plain arguing. Schelling is pointing to one very, very important thing that we give very little importance to, is the concept of a focal point. A focal point is a bit mystical. It's almost a matter of psychology, but it's amazing that it works. And the example that he had given is that there are two persons who have decided to meet in New York. So they said, tomorrow let's meet in New York at 12 o'clock. They have forgotten to decide where they will meet. And these are the olden days. There's no email or iPhone or anything. At 12 o'clock, you have to go and wait for your friend somewhere. They want to meet. So if you think of this as a game, this game has lots of Nash equilibria. Any place where both of them go, they are thrilled. No one would have gone anywhere else. So the city is riddled with Nash equilibria. But where will they go? Schelling had done an experiment in class asking students, this has happened, where will you go? What do? You think your best as to where might the other person come. And the other person is thinking, where might you come? And you very often do manage to coincide. He had found that 70% of Americans end up at the Grand Central Station to wait for the other person with no plan. So they find the Nash equilibrium through a mysterious psychological element. And I used to make my Indian students in Delhi school play this game. In New York, this has happened. What will you do? In India, Grand Central is not as salient as those days Empire State Building used to be. And it's amazing, a large number of students would say, I'll go to Empire State Building and wait for the other person. And the fact that this works, the notion of focal point, which is mystical, but it works, is the best example is in airports. In the olden days, the students here won't remember, olden days, it would happen often enough. You've told someone, let's meet in the airport when we are both there. You have not decided where it is. And then you're trying to guess. Where will my friend be? Will it be the bookshop, or will it be the toy shop or the clothes shop? You're trying to go there. The airport authorities have now solved it by creating a focal point. They put a sign which says meeting point. No one is forced, it's not law, nothing, but it works. You know that if you haven't decided where to meet, you go and wait over there, and the other person does that. My full book, The Republic of Beliefs, is an argument that in the end, the law is nothing but the creation of a focal point. The law creates expectations of what the police will do to you if you behave wrongly. And the police will behave in that manner because the police now expects that once this is the law, if I don't punish Kaushik who's driving very fast, then my boss is going to not promote me in my job. In the end, the law is nothing but a locking in of beliefs. Just give me 5 minutes on the leadership puzzle and the formalization. Maybe I'm going to skip over that. Let me now, leaders are important because they can steer a group in through the focal point, nothing more than that. So ordinary people's beliefs are very important in different directions. But there are also some beautiful ideas you get where mechanism design becomes important. One problem which seeing Belarus, I got thinking about is that Lukashenko, at one point it seemed that Lukashenko is about to fall. But Lukashenko did not fall. What happened? And this is a case where a very simple logic can be shown. Lukashenko, I don't think, was deliberately using that logic, but effectively the society got structured in there, and that logic can stop a descent. This logic that I will use just now, it will take me 5 minutes to explain, and all of you will get it, and I'm skipping over the little formal bit which I will discuss with 2-3 of you later on, and that's incomplete. That's something I've been toying with, but this one is complete. It's in my paper in the philosophy journal Synthes called The Incarceration Game. I do want to show that to you because after I wrote the paper, now I'm fully aware, it's an exact analog of a paradox in philosophy, which was first discovered in 1949 and published in the journal Mind, called the surprise test paradox. I don't know if you know that. One of my computer science colleagues at Cornell is Joe Halpern, is one of the earliest persons who had tried to mathematically formalize the surprise test paradox. I'll tell that to you later, what the paradox is, in case you don't know, but first let me give you this very practical problem. By the way, I should acknowledge my student, Ajit Mishra. I had developed this paper without realizing I'm using an analog from philosophy. He pointed out that actually it's the same structure as the surprise test, and in my published paper I do point to that. Let me just jump to this. This is quite interesting. This was the little formal bit, but those who are interested, I'll show them later. And really, if you, both these papers have much more material, so if you get interested, write to me and I'll show you. This is the Belarus with 1,000 citizens. Let us say all of them want to come out and protest. And Belarus at one time was looking like that. And I'm just creating an example, and if at least half of them come out and protest, the regime will fall. Each person is very keen to protest, but they will not protest if the probability of being jailed is greater than half. Now, there is place for only 10 persons in jail. Lukashenko doesn't have capacity for anymore. It seems like a hopeless case. They will protest because the probability of being caught is tiny, and the regime is going to fall. But there is a structure of intervention which can stop that from happening. And this is the structure I'll give you verbally. It's exact reasoning of surprise test paradox in case you're familiar with it. Break up the 1,000 people, 1,000 citizens into groups of, let me say, groups of 100. The easiest way to do that is age. The oldest 100, the 100 oldest people is group 1. The second oldest 100 people is group 2. The third oldest 100 people is group 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. The babies are in 10, and let's leave out babies, actually, youngsters. So that's the 1,000 citizens, and it's broken up into groups of 100. Now let us say that Lukashenko says that if people are out protesting, no, I'm making a slight change. Should not cause a problem. Let's make it groups of 10. The logic will be easier. The 10 oldest is group 1. second oldest 10, group 2. And that way you go down to 100 groups. Exactly the same thing, but groups of 10. And now Lukashenko makes an announcement, which is never done explicitly. I don't think he was thinking along those lines, but these structures can fall into place. And there is a scope for formalizing and generalizing this. That if there are lots of people protesting, the oldest people will be arrested. 10 of them. We don't have space for more. That's the announcement. And let's say this is common knowledge. In this society, it's common knowledge, the age structure and the announcement. The common knowledge, for those who are not familiar, common knowledge is a technical term formalized by the Israeli economist Aumann. Common knowledge is the following idea. And also there are philosophers who, on parallel, in words were formalizing similar ideas. Something is a common knowledge. If I know and Narayana knows it, and I know that Narayana knows this, and Narayana knows that I know this, and I know that Narayana knows that I know that Narayana knows this, no matter how many times you say, if all those statements are true, then you say, not only do we know this, but this is common knowledge. Now, in this society, the age is common knowledge. We know people's age. We know that people know people's age. We know that people know that people know that people's age, etc. And this rule comes into play. And now you will see what happens. You're thinking of going out to protest. The oldest 10 people are not going to go out because they are going to be certainly incarcerated, put in jail. Given that it's common knowledge who the 10 oldest people are, can you see that the second oldest 10 people will not go out and protest? Given that everyone knows who's the oldest, who's the second oldest, and everyone knows that the third oldest 10 people will not go out. And this backward induction comes winding all the way down to the youngsters. No one goes out. The streets of Belarus are empty. It looks like no one wants to protest. They are fully supporting, but it's an equilibrium. It's a mechanism which gives rise to this equilibrium, which traps this. Just 2 more words, and another 3-4 minutes is all right. Then I'll take questions. One is, in case you're not familiar with the surprise test paradox, it's lovely, it's a great fun. I had spent, as a PhD student, a lot of time trying to solve it, nothing to do with my research, but got interested, had no idea. Then I met Joe Halpern from computer science, who had his own solutions. There are many different ways of solving it, and there are hundreds and thousands of papers on the surprise test paradox, but in case you don't know that, it's something worth mulling over. Exactly the same logic. In a school, a headmaster comes in and tells the students that next week I'm going to give you a surprise test. What does a surprise test mean? It means that you won't know on the previous day that the test is coming. It'll be a surprise. And the headmaster goes away, and the students are feeling awful, that it's horrible suddenly being told today is the surprise test. Over the weekend, they are thinking, one student, let's say this is the best student, is trying to think, when might the test be held? Let me think a little bit. She reaches a very interesting conclusion. The surprise test, the headmaster cannot be scheduling it for Friday. Friday is the last day of the week. Because if it is on Friday, then on Thursday, when school ends, we will all know it's tomorrow. So by definition, a surprise test can never be held on Friday. Ruled out, Friday ruled out, very interesting. Then she reaches an interesting conclusion. It can't be held on a Thursday. Suppose it's planned for Thursday. Then when school ends on Wednesday, I have empirical evidence it has not been held thus far. By logic, I know it can't be held on Friday. Therefore, I can deduce it will be held tomorrow, Thursday. Therefore, it's not a surprise. So there can't be a surprise test on Thursday either. Friday ruled out, Thursday ruled out. Can you see Wednesday is ruled out? Because on Tuesday evening, you've got empirical evidence it hasn't been held thus far. By logic, you know it can't be on Friday or Thursday. Therefore, it'll be on Wednesday. The fact that you know it'll be on Wednesday, it can't be on Wednesday. Surprise tests can't be held on Earth. That's the conclusion. It's a paradox, of course. Something is going wrong somewhere. But actually, economics has so many of these. Once you begin to scrape and think, there are just problems and puzzles which remain over there, and we want to understand them just to create a better world. I do believe, and is that the path from here is a collective moment for many more collective actions. And collective actions, I'm very aware, because I do believe in individual liberty and freedom being very important. You don't want to come tumbling down on that. At the same time, certain structures, certain norms, So many of our moral norms are built into us. But as society gets more complex, we may need different kinds of moral norms for the society that we are getting into. And we ignore that in economics, as if those things don't matter, they matter in a big way. This is the time to scrape into that and look at some of our implicit assumptions and try to reconstruct. Thank you. I'm very happily, yeah. Yeah, so anyone can, you're welcome to ask.
Yes.
So thank you, Professor Basu, for this wonderful talk. I'm Shuja, I'm from Computer Science Department. So you mentioned about this scenario where these 1,000 people lying on the beach and they saw the child drowning. So my question is that there is also this parameter which is the reaction time. So there are events where the reaction time is small, but then there are events where the reaction time is large. So how do we take that into account? Like seeing something is happening for a period of time, the response from a group might change, right? So, I mean, I also understand that you considered this later on in this payoff, but one thing that also occurs to my mind is that these payoffs for these individuals, given the reaction time is very long, that could also redefine, right?
Sujan, a very good question. That problem actually is, there are two kinds of games that we do in game theory. One is, these are called normal form games or strategic form games, where at one instant everyone takes a decision. I have stuck with examples where it is all normal form games. And even Feinberg's example is where there's a moment when each one simultaneously has to decide whether I go up and save this kid or not.
Right.
But what you're pointing to, deliberately these games are made very simple to precipitate these problems. But there's another class of games with a huge literature. These are called extensive form games, where there is reaction time. You can watch others' behavior and then you react. You have to write that up, and some of these problems will vanish, will not happen in an extensive form game. But some of these problems will come back to haunt you, and in fact new problems may get created in extensive form games. I have had a lot of interest in extensive form games. But yeah, in this case, it's very artificially constructed to block. There is no reaction time or watching others. There's a point of time when you have to decide, should I go up and save that person or not? All of you do it simultaneously, game over. That's the way it's done, just to precipitate this. And though Joel Feinberg, who wrote the philosophy papers, not a game theorist, the way he wrote it is in the language of a normal form game or a strategic form game, where it's one moment where you take the decision, that's it. But as soon as you go that route, very many interesting problems begin to crop up indeed.
But how does one define these dynamic payoffs? Like if you, so if you are in a situation where the reaction time is very large and then the group can see what others are doing, but then the scenario of the payoffs for individuals might change, right?
Yes. So, but that does not cause a problem. What will happen is, as the time goes on, the payoff could be changing depending on what you've done over here. So the way we do that is we write them down as what are called game trees. So there are branches of moves, and at the top of the branch, you write down the payoff. If you go up another path, the payoff may well be different. And there's another class of games which is by Ariel Rubinstein started it, which is when you're bargaining. You'll say, well, I'll give you this much. You'll say, no, but I want this much. You continue to bargain. He makes it interesting by saying that the cake is gradually becoming smaller if you take longer. So there's a different urgency that picks up, that I want a bigger share, but I know that the longer we are prolonging it, the cake is becoming smaller. Again, that has been formally studied. Now there's a biggish literature on that. So it's just a very big topic, so I can't give you more specific answers than this, but it is indeed there. And actually, some of the early work on this, absolute founding work is by Reinhard Zelten in Germany, but there are very prominent Indians like Dilip Abru and others who did some of the early founding work on this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is there's someone there? Yes.
Hello. So my question is, in the incarceration game, what nudge can we introduce to make the citizens protest?
I don't know. So this did strike me as watching different examples, and in my paper in Synthese, I give examples. You know, in Tunisia, when the Jasmine Revolution happened, Ben Ali, the authoritarian leader over there, almost in the last week it was appearing that the protests would be squashed, but it went the other way around. Suddenly Ben Ali left the country and the rebellion succeeded. Lukashenko's case, or Myanmar for instance, there were times when it was reaching a bubbling point and then it goes down. Myanmar, it's going down still with a lot of very rough tactics being used. Lukashenko, it's sort of quietened down. So don't know. And this is the question I'm raising, that many of these things, once you realize that just being determined, full of goodness is not good enough, you need the architecture of design. So many of these things, the only way to look at it is having prior rules and institutions whereby you object if these rules are being violated. For instance, in this case, if there's a rule saying that when there are protesters, you can't discriminate against who you pick up first, so the age can't be used. For instance, if you have that. But for any rule to work, and this is my full book on the Republic of Beliefs, a rule or a law in the end is a few things written down on paper. Only reason the law makes a difference is if others believe in it, then it locks in and creates. But that, if you think hard enough, the law is nothing but some words on paper. Nevertheless, it triggers behavior in some places. There are many laws which everyone collectively ignores. India is full of laws and statutes which no one follows, but some laws that follow. So there are those deeper questions. But once you realize that something like this is happening, you have to think in structures to be built in advance. And thereby it gives you an insight into the importance of constitutions, which are rules in advance that guide society and lock society in. And the more you can see the problems that can arise in the future and do that in advance, the better a society you get. But I don't have a clean answer. These are open questions.
Thank you.
There was one here. Yeah.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the talk you had given.
Sorry, where is it coming from? Yeah, not that it matters. Even if I can't see where it's coming from, I'll hear, but it feels better.
So I'm a second year student in economics department, and for context, I haven't studied much of game theory. So forgive me, my question feels a bit small. So that example you had given, that 1,000 people in Belarus, in the top 10 who are highest in age, they'll be jailed. But like, we are not factoring like riskability or something like that. Because riskability, like if we are in the top 10 most aged people, we can think that if we will stand forward, because of that the other people will be motivated that we have some backup. So more than half of the people will protest. Since more than half of the people will protest, the regime will fall, and then you will not go to jail.
Very good question. To do that formally, you need to begin a little bit of an extensive form game. That if the regime falls, do they get arrested or not? The way I'm writing it down is they will still get picked up. But the regime will fall after that. So it depends on the sequence in which these things happen. If it is the case that if the regime falls, they don't get picked up anymore, or they get immediately liberated from jail, exactly your logic is going to go through. But if I make it, tighten it by artificially doing the following, that the top 10 will be picked up, they will be punished, but the regime will fall if your logic goes through. But of course, you need then in the top 10 a selflessness. And this actually in my paper I point out, if the top 10 includes Gandhi, 13, who are not reasoning the way most of us are reasoning, then this logic will not occur. Because the top ones will say, okay, I'm willing to go and I'm standing up, and then the others come out. They will get picked up in this game. But if you want to create the kind of story you're saying for me, you have to restructure the order of the decision making to get that. It indeed should be possible.
Okay, and one more follow-up question.
Sure.
Like you had given that example of a test taking in a week. I had learnt a similar example in which like a person was hanged any day and will be surprised. But for by the logic at any day,
By the way, it's the same.
It's the same.
Version
Yeah.
of the surprise test, which later became the hangman paradox.
Yeah. So according to the game theory logic, he shouldn't be. He will know when he's being hanged, but still he is surprised when, let's say, that he is hanged on Wednesday. So what factor are we missing in this through our calculation?
Yeah, it's the. I mean, the fact that surprise tests happen and people do get a surprise is the reason why this is called a paradox. This is not saying that surprise tests don't happen, but this logic tells you that it won't happen, and you can immediately see the fact that the logic tells you it won't happen. When it happens, you say it is a surprise. So, and that's what a paradox is. There are two ways in which you are reasoning and hitting contradictory conclusions. Paradoxes usually open up deeper questions, and since you're raising the paradox, I do believe I'm skipping this a little bit here. You know, in the game of life, where everything that we do is construct a big game, there is, I feel, that concept of the paradox, and there's one of the most famous paradoxes in logic and mathematics is the set of everything. I don't know if you know that Bertrand Russell, when he was working with Whitehead, hit upon that. He was making implicit use of an assumption that there is a set of everything, and then you do your set K. Then he was beginning to hit upon a paradox, two contradictory conclusions through logic, which was not making sense. It took about a year to realize that the paradox was occurring because there was an assumption that was being made without being aware, namely that there is a set of everything. And now we know that in set theory, you don't say there's a universal set by waving your hand. You have to define that this is the set. You can't say, let's start from the set of everything. My hunch is in paradoxes like this, the surprise test or the hangman paradox, there is another implicit assumption we are making in the meaning of the surprise, meaning of something which we are not even aware of. Someday that will be solved, and there'll be another paradox with that also.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Professor. So I'm from Center for Policy Studies, and my question is somewhere derived from that, and also the fact that I'm studying at a technological institute. So if you could share some insights on ethical implications of tech advancements such as AI or automation that we are seeing in the market, and what is their impact on the group moral responsibility in reshaping the job markets, the supply chains, the policy-making processes that are being followed, and how those are impacting the societal structures that we are seeing in the last few decades. Also, a lot of these decisions are taken by group entities as opposed to individual entities. So how can the society and government create structures of incentives or probably punitive measures such that we are able to move towards safeguarding our governments and the world in general?
Yeah, it's a very big question, and I do have a big research agenda on job markets and labor. First of all, it is entirely possible that we will not be able to handle this challenge. The advance of AI technology will cause a dissolution in society. Apocalyptic moment. It's our own advance that messes up society so dramatically that we go the route of the dinosaur. Possible. It's a dreadful thought, but you can't just logically rule it out that won't happen. It's possible. Can we avert it? That's also possible, but I'm not sure what the solution is. I have one little thought. I'm giving you a preview of what I'm beginning to do some research on, is I do believe that mechanical labor is going to vanish. So there will be no more need for the labor which is hard work, where it's a bit painful, where people do and get paid for. That's going to be taken off over by artificial intelligence and robots. When I discussed this with American labor economists, they said, well, that's going to destroy people. May happen, but here is my solution to that. We can't have, if labor vanishes altogether, all the work is being done by robots that are moving around and doing all the tough work. In itself, this would not be a bad thing at all if all the income did not go to people who just own properties, own the robots, own the patents on those machines, but those incomes were shared. The big challenge is going to be that after work has vanished, if income doesn't go into just a few hands, but we learn to distribute that income through very radical measures, then we will survive. The work is gone, we are just doing fun things, watching a film, playing music, and there's going to be a bit of a question about maybe another kind of labor, which the definition of labor in this new society can be different. And an example on this is certain activities which can be labor or not be labor can flip status. That's why this is a research agenda-wise exciting. You know, take lecturing. Socrates used to enjoy lecturing so much that it is believed, and I think it is Xenophon writes somewhere, that Socrates would be willing to pay people to come and listen to him. So the laborers are people who have to sit and listen to Socrates because he enjoyed teaching so much. So Socrates' lecture, who is doing the work, whether Socrates is doing or people who are coming and sitting down, changes status, good change. I feel this is sounds jocular, of course, now, but as we move into a world where AI is taking over all work, there'll be new forms of activity which I currently do purely for fun or the other way, which is going to change its status from labor to non-labor. But the important thing is it is time for radical policy interventions. And since I began with the mentioned the Industrial Revolution, I should tell you, you know, we came out of the Industrial Revolution better off. In the beginning, the skies were going dark, children were working for 14 hours. It's a dreadful situation in Britain. But there were radical policies being brought in, which now don't look radical to us. In 1842, when the income tax was brought in, initially it was thought it's outrageous. I'm working, why will the government take away a part of my income? Now we think of that as normal. You can't run a modern society without some tax being collected. I feel we are at a juncture where we'll have to think of dramatic new policies, but the march of technology is going to continue. No one is doing it individually. It's almost like gravity. It's almost a natural process. We'll have to be innovative in terms of policies.
Thank you very much. This one is on.
Thank you so much, Professor Basu. I would like to request Professor K. Narayanan for the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Basu, or as we affectionately call you, thank you so much, Kaushik Da. Excellent talk, and as always, very complex thing presented simply to wide spectrum of audience here. And we are really grateful to you. We appreciate that you do spare some time and visit us. And we look forward to your visits again and again so that we benefit immensely from the interactions. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Ravi also.
Yeah, I join Professor Narayanan. I think a very brilliant talk from Professor Kaushik Basu. Thank you very much. I must say this on behalf of the NR KAMATH committee as well, that talks like this are tremendously beneficial to all of us faculty, but more importantly to all of the students. You get very enthused, very inspiring talk. And on behalf of the NR KAMATH committee as well, Srimat Sinka is here, several of them online. I would certainly like to acknowledge your gracious presence here, taking the time off, visiting IIT Bombay. We look forward to your continuous participation in various activities of IIT Bombay, and thanks so much for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time. Please join for the tea in the foyer.